If you come into contact with a teacher who's teaching awareness, who's teaching about the possibility of being awake and alive, it's kind of an initiation. And there really does come a time, whether it's in the psychotherapeutic process or in the teaching process, there really does come a time when you have to be clear that you're initiating yourself into another form of existence. You're coming out. It's just like the caterpillar becoming a butterfly, you know. But in the case of a human being, you're initiating the process yourself. It's not just happening the way it does in nature. It requires you to initiate it, and the only way you can initiate it is you have to have an experience of being awareness. Otherwise, it would make no sense. Otherwise, you wouldn't do it. You simply wouldn't do it. It wouldn't make any sense to you. Was that there was I think it was a lion, a very rare lion that was somewhere in the world being taken care of, and it was being kept in a cage. And the people who were the caretakers of this very rare lion decided that it was inhumane to really keep this animal contained like that. And so they found this place where there were hundreds of acres of open land, and they brought this rare lion there and opened the cage. And the lion walked to the corner of the property and started pacing back and forth and never left the rest of its life. Never left that. With all the hundreds of acres, the lion went to the corner of the property, started pacing back and forth, and never left that area for the rest of its life. So the point of that is to say that even given the opportunity for freedom that we talk about here, because in a sense it's the same thing, you know, I'm saying to you there is, and in the case of this work that we're doing in these practices and these teachings, it's not like you have to go anywhere to get to that big space. That big space is always available to you. And so you're being introduced to the possibility of having a limitless experience of yourself as awareness, a limitless experience of yourself as awareness. And even though that's the case, and even though you comprehend it, even though there is, to some extent, a conceptual understanding of what it is, and that's an attraction, right? Because everybody wants to have that kind of freedom. Even though that's the case, the reality for you and I is that we will go back and pace the cage some more. You know, you'll keep moving in the same patterns in your life that you were moving in before. The difference between the lion and us is that there is a possibility, given the kind of awareness that human beings have, to notice that. See, the lion can't notice that. The lion's brain is doing what it does, and it's going to continue to do it until it dies. For a human being, the awareness of a human being is such that it's possible to notice that. And the interesting thing about it is that if you notice that, all you have to do is notice that. And the awareness itself will get the job done. All you have to do is pay attention and see that, and the awareness itself will have you begin to expand and have you begin to see new possibilities for action, see new ways of being that you didn't see before. And upon seeing those ways of being, you will naturally begin to expand yourself and be ways that you never were before and do things that you never did before. So it's a useful thing to use examples like that so that you can understand how all this works. One of the things that George Gurdjieff said, George Gurdjieff was a famous consciousness teacher, and one of the things that he taught his students was to intentionally violate your patterns. In other words, if you're right-handed, right? If you're right-handed, right? do everything with the left hand for a day. You're going to have to be aware to do it, aren't you?
Sure.
Yeah. So it's a way of staying conscious, is to notice that you're operating in patterns. And if you're practicing being aware consistently through these meditation practices, one of the things you'll begin to experience, and I know some of you already have, is that you'll find yourself in situations in which there's a certain pattern that would play, a certain way that you would be, certain things that you would say, right? Certain ways that you would be, certain things that you would say when you were angry or upset, right? And through the practice of meditation, what begins to happen gradually is in the middle of that, you notice that you're in a pattern. You notice that you're about to say the same kind of thing as you've said in the past. You notice that something is running. You can feel the energy of it running, you see. And the awareness of that being the case is an opening for possibility that didn't exist before you started to practice meditation. You didn't know the difference. You were unconscious, and you were unconscious that you're unconscious. No possibility, see. But through practicing meditation, it becomes possible for you to begin to wake up and notice the unconsciousness, which means there's now an awareness of the unconsciousness. And once there's an awareness of the unconsciousness, it's no longer unconscious. So it's important to understand. One of the things that I've been hammering recently with you, because I think it really is appropriate to where I hope you are, is to allow yourself to value what's most important to you. Allow yourself to value that. Allow yourself to value the possibility of being awake and alive, and therefore value the practice of meditation. And if you value the practice of meditation and you value the possibility of being awake and alive, then you will act in accord with that. You'll act consistent with that. You'll come to this class, for example, whether you feel like it or not, you see. Because resistance is going to happen if you haven't noticed. Right? So every time you violate that resistance, every time you show up here when your mind didn't want to come, every time you show up here when your body didn't want to come, it wanted to sleep, you have violated the pattern. And you're creating a new pattern. There's nothing inherently wrong with patterns. Patterns are absolutely necessary in life, aren't they? So there's nothing wrong with patterns. It's when the pattern is a pattern that is playing out in order to help you to survive when there's no threat. You see? When you're behaving in relationship to the people that you love and the people you're closest to as if they're the enemy, right? Because when your system feels threatened, that's what it's going to do. It doesn't care whether you're married to that person. It doesn't care how much you love them. It doesn't care how close you are to them. It becomes mechanical and automatic. You know what I mean? It's like a weapon system, right? It becomes mechanical and automatic. And when it gets triggered, right, and who triggered it appears to be a threat to your survival, the system will go into operation and literally have you kill them. One of the things that caught my attention that amazed me is there's a soul singer, I'm trying to remember his name now, who, maybe you can help me, the name of the guy who made the song, What's Going On? Marvin Gaye. Interesting situation, right? Do you know what happened to him? His father killed him. Yes. It's an example of what I just said. Obviously, for you to be the father of a child, your child, that relationship is a very deep relationship. That's a very powerful connection to have with a human being. And you know what he killed him over? What?
Drugs. He was taking drugs, from what I understand, and his father was. That's the story I heard.
Well, what it boiled down to was money.
Oh, yeah,
And if you listen to that song, What's Going On, that he made famous, you listen to that song, and that was made before this happened, obviously,
Yeah.
right? The words to that song are a direct contradiction to what ended up happening.
Yes.
So that just goes to show, the once that weapon system comes into play. Now, there's all kinds of killing. You could kill somebody by killing their body, but you could kill somebody by killing who they are for you. That's another form of murder, right? So that's the kind of thing that you begin to see, that when these patterns play, and that's when you feel threatened, when the system goes off. That's what we're up against here. That's what we're up against here, because the human brain and the nervous system, right, is a weapon system. Bottom line, because when push comes to shove and you feel threatened enough, right, you become a weapon. And you are blind, in a sense, because the system is overriding everything and just going after stopping the threat. That's in the most extreme cases, right? But one of the problems for us as human beings is the nervous system and the brain that we are comes from a time when surviving every day was an issue. And we haven't caught up. We haven't caught up to the fact that we're no longer living in the jungle. We're no longer trying to survive against animals that see us as food. That's not happening now. But the system, the limbic system in the brain, is still operating in that mode. Right? So when we practice meditation, one of the things that we're doing is we're being present to the reality that we're actually in, where there is no threat. We're being present to that reality. So the brain and the mind that's hyperactive, that's hypervigilant, that's on alert all the time, it's in orange all the time, right? That the relationship between the way that system is running and the presence that you have, the awareness that you have where there's no threat, right? That by your staying there, being still, and experiencing, being aware that there's no threat happening right now, gradually the system will start to dissipate and reorganize itself. That's neuroplasticity. We know now that the brain is always reorganizing. Moment to moment, it's reorganizing itself in relationship to what's happening. So when you're practicing meditation, your brain is reorganizing itself in relationship to there being no threat right now. And so gradually it will reorganize itself, and the limbic system and the amygdala, the brain will begin to stand down. The brain will begin to calm down. And as that happens, you'll feel less like you have to fight or flight whenever you're in a situation that triggers, the system. You'll feel less like you have to fight or flight. And more like if you're present there and you actually see what's going on, you see new ways of being that bring about different outcomes. You see it. And you can start to behave consistent with that. It'll begin, for most people, I think it begins by not doing what you would have done. You may not yet know what to do other than that, but if you just don't do what you would have otherwise done, in a lot of cases, that's a big deal. That's a big change. You stop pissing people off. You stop hurting people. You stop upsetting people and upsetting yourself. You stop creating situations in your life that you need lawyers for. Lawyers, they make their business off of unconscious people, don't they? Well, there's got to be, it's got to be made available. It's just like some of the current teachers out there are criticizing other teachers and saying, that they're taking advantage of people, and that they're looking to make money, and they're not real, they're inauthentic, and so forth and so on. And the bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, is I'm glad they're there. I'm glad they're there, right? So you can choose to be stupid. Otherwise, you may have not ever learned about your stupidity, you see. You have to be able in this process to make wrong turns and to understand and accept that that's part of the process. But there's a damn big difference between making wrong turns in a process that's heading in the right direction. See, there's a big difference between making wrong turns in a process that's heading in the right direction than just following the herd that's running off a cliff mindlessly, which is the way most people are living their life. It's, and you know, you can, and as you wake up, as you become more and more conscious and aware, and you look at people that are really completely lost in the sauce, people who are completely lost in thought, people who are completely lost in patterns and so forth and so on. One of the ways that you know you're on the right path is that when you see those people, it breaks your heart. You have compassion for them, right? And one of the ways you know that you're not on the right path is if you're self-righteous about yourself, you know, that I'm better than them. I'm awake and they're asleep. See, that's the thing. That's one of the things that I think is important for us to get. Even if you don't succeed in this life, in whatever way you think you need to succeed to wake up and be who you really are, right? It doesn't change the truth. If there's no death, there's no death. It's not a matter of there not being any death except for you, right? You're just missing the boat. If there's no death, you're just being afraid of something that's not going to happen. That's all, right? The truth is the truth, whether you get it or not. You know, the fact that you are free and that you are, if you want to talk about it in terms of enlightenment, you know, the fact that you are enlightened already and that you are free and that your life is an opportunity to fulfill on the possibility of expressing God through you. Your life is an opportunity for that. And I don't mean to sound religious about that, right? But if you just look at that in a practical, everyday way of seeing it, what does that mean? It means that you're free to express love and not have fear stop you, is what it means. And that's a big challenge, isn't it? I mean, even with the people that you love, that you're close to, that you get along with well, right? What's the difference between that and what you could express in terms of what you're holding back? You know what I mean? What you don't want to go too far with, because that would be too much of a risk. You know what I mean? If it goes bad, you know, you'll get hurt more if you go that far, right? But you see, once you understand the way the way this works, you come to realize that's simply not true. Because if you go that far and you're coming from who you are, there is no possibility of getting hurt. Who you are can't get hurt. And that's the freedom to love full out. Freedom to love full out. Given the way this work works, and given the nature of the truth, the situations that we fear and the situations we find ourselves in that are challenging us and really cornering us and really pushing us are great opportunities to wake up. That's the way to look at it. Because you have to understand something. From the point of view of awareness, none of that stuff is actually happening. Right? Because from the point of view of awareness, all the things that you're afraid of, all the things that seem threatening to you are coming from the system that you've been conditioned to be, right? All the things that you're afraid of are coming from the condition that you are in. And as you continue to practice, you're gradually coming out of that conditioning, a little bit at a time, right? And so it's important for you to understand that that's the way that this works. When you go to work on changing your brain through meditation, you have to be rigorous about it. You have to stay in the process and understand the challenges so that you don't get lost. And trust me, in this whole business of spiritual teaching and practices, there's plenty of room to get lost. Plenty of room to get lost. You have to stop. See, one of the ways that you can avoid getting lost is to give up the idea that you're seeking anything. You're not seeking anything. You can spend lifetimes as a seeker. You know, one of the teachers that I've studied said to his students, give up the search. Stop seeking things. Because as long as you're seeking things, you're operating as if you're not who you are. That's what you're doing. Whenever you're seeking something, you're operating as if you're not already there. And that's a waste of energy. So don't seek things. Understand that the truth is already the case. And when we're practicing meditation, all we're doing is allowing that which isn't true to fall away. Allowing the power of the fire of the present moment to burn the lies off. Understand? Allowing the power of the fire of the present moment to burn the lies off. Because what isn't true can't withstand awareness. Do you understand? What isn't true cannot withstand awareness. So you're not trying to get anywhere. You're there, and your being there consistently will have what's not true fall away. So things get easier and easier, as Paul Hederman says. But one of the things that you want to be careful about is don't make rules. Awareness doesn't need rules. Awareness can be responding to what's happening appropriately, right? If you make rules, you're just creating a new limited structure to operate from. You see what I'm saying? And when you talk about resistance, right? When you talk about resistance is going to come up. The system is going to bring up resistance. So it's not like you have a choice about that. Resistance is going to come up, right? So how do you deal with that? You see, if you come up with a strategy, don't resist, right? That's what you're talking about. Don't resist. I promise you, you'll fail. But you have to understand how to master resistance in order to be effective in dealing with it, you see. Because resistance is going to come up. So if the strategy is don't resist, you'll be frustrated and you'll hate yourself for how you can't stop resisting. Because resistance is going to come up anyway. Right? So how do you get out of that? So how do you deal with resistance? This is a very important thing because resistance is a big factor, isn't it? Right? So how do you deal with resistance effectively so that resistance doesn't stop you from continuing to do what works? When you notice it, what happens is that you're not resisting when awareness comes into play. Resistance is appearing, but you're not resisting. That's the difference. I keep saying, when it comes to thinking, you're not thinking. Thoughts are occurring, right? But the automatic way of experiencing that is that I'm thinking, right? And so that's the pattern. That's the already way of being that you are. And the same thing is true with resistance, you know? So the quick answer to this business of how do you deal with resistance, right, is you don't resist resisting. You don't resist resisting. In other words, when resistance appears, if I'm not resisting, I'm still free. Right? I'm not resisting, I'm still free. The resistance can come up to coming to class tonight because there are other things I'd rather do. I'm tired, on and on and on. The resistance can come up, right? But if I don't resist the resistance, if I accept the resistance, if I allow the resistance, if I love the resistance, it's no longer something that I am in conflict with. I can now dance with it. I can now move with it and express the freedom that I have to go to the class anyway. Doesn't matter whether there's resistance or not. Yeah, anything you're aware of, anything that you're aware of, you're not that. You can't be that because you're aware of that. Do you understand? That's the natural process of awareness in terms of how it works in relationship to resistance, in relationship to emotions, in relationship to thoughts. It's all the same thing. All you have to do is be aware. And when you're aware, you see it as it is. You see that resistance is resistance. You see that one of the things when you identify with resistance, you see, when I am resisting, right? Then you're in the world of the resistance being the resistor. And in that world, it will seem to be so that it makes sense to go with the resistance. It makes sense to stay home. I'll be more comfortable. Oh, it's okay to miss one class. Right? Yeah, that's the kind of conversation you're having when you're identifying with resistance. Right? Resistance is the conditioning showing up when you're not being the conditioning. Right? Because the brain and the mind want to keep you in your patterns, want to keep you pacing the cage. Doesn't want you to walk outside of that cage. It's too dangerous to do that, even though that's not true. You see, that lion couldn't know that it wasn't true, that it could walk on these hundreds of acres. It didn't know that it wasn't true. All it had was the system that it was, and that said, stay in this one place. And that's what your brain will do with you. Stay in this one place.
Your thoughts are coming from your experiences?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, they're coming from your experiences being used as a database by the brain and the mind to produce more survival behavior. Because that's the program.